κάτσουμε 2-3 λεπτά, περιμένουμε τον κύριο Γενικό να έρθει να είναι απόψε μαζί μας. 2-3 λεπτάκια ακόμα. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Presbytera Chrysoula Kourkoudi, the Executive Director, and on behalf of our entire Maliotti Cultural Center team, it is my joy to welcome here this evening to the presentation with Thea Hello and a special introduction with Dr. Evridiki Georgadelis. We also would like to welcome the Consul General of Greece. We know that he's coming shortly, so he will join us in a few minutes. The Honorable Mr. Simeon Teos. So thanks for coming.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Markela Petitsis, the Assistant Director of Maliotti's Cultural Center, and we welcome you this evening to Setting the Record Straight on the Christian Genocides in Ottoman Turkey from 1913 to 1923 with Thea Hello. Before we begin our presentation, please allow me to share a little bit about our center. The Maliotti's Cultural Center's mission is to promote Hellenic culture and language. We pursue our mission through diverse programming, including lectures, seminars, and conferences, Greek concerts and dance performances, student engagement, traveling and permanent exhibits, and Hellenic American community events, and through the support of patrons and viewers like you. The Maliotti's Cultural Center also serves as the main social and cultural gathering place for the students of both Hellenic College and the Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology. If you enjoy this event, please consider supporting the center by donating on our website, www.maliottisculturalcenter.edu, or making a check out to Maliotti's Cultural Center, and by attending our other upcoming events. All these events are free and open to the public. Next Wednesday, February 8th, we will have the Athos Diet with emergency medicine physician Dr. Peter Petitsis, who will speak about his book, The Athos Diet, and the pillars of the diet, plant-based high protein, intermittent fasting, and walking. The event will feature a sampling of vegan and Mediterranean plates as well. Thursday, February 9th, join us for MCC's Valentine's Social with live Rebetika music from Greece's islands, as well as Smirneika and Laika by the band Revma, also with refreshments. Monday, February 13th, we will have a presentation by Dr. Alexander Lingis, founder and music director of the vocal ensemble Capella Romana. His presentation will be called The Lost Music of Hagia Sophia, the Form and Modern Recovery of the Byzantine Cathedral Rite. And another event next week, Wednesday, February 15th, MCC will host a book presentation of John Michael Boyer, Protopsaltis of the Greek Orthodox Metropolis of San Francisco, on his new book, Byzantine Chant, The Received Tradition. All events are free and open to the public, and we welcome you. You can also learn about these and more offerings on our website, Instagram, Facebook, or through our MCC newsletter, which you can sign up for at the greeting table at the back of the room. Now I welcome tonight's host, Dr. Evridiki Georgadelis, who was instrumental in organizing this event. Dr. Georgadelis orchestrated the connection with Thea Hello and the Maliotti's Cultural Center, and we're so grateful for her loving insistence to bring Thea to Boston. We are all in for a treat tonight. A little bit about Evridiki. Evridiki Georgadelis studied art history and archaeology at Aristotle University in Thessaloniki and numismatics at the universities of Oxford and Cambridge in the UK. Before joining Harvard University as lecturer in art history and numismatics, she was the keeper of coins at the Barber Institute of Fine Arts and lecturer in numismatics at the University of Birmingham, UK, from 2000 to 2016, where she spearheaded the conservation, digitization, and display of the coins and seals collection, and directed the graduate program in numismatics from 2001 through 2012. An award-winning curator, author, and academic tutor, she has lectured and held research fellowships in Europe and the United States. From 2012 to 2016, she was Marie Curie Senior Research Fellow and Principal Investigator of 2 European research projects on cultural routes and digital heritage. A specialist in Southeastern Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean, Georgadelis has taught, curated exhibitions, and published on late antique and medieval art, numismatics, archaeology, portable antiquities, cultural heritage, and digital storytelling. She uses archaeological evidence, written sources, and the changing patterns and the geography of transport to trace economic and cultural exchange in late antique and medieval Europe and the Middle East. She is a trustee of Hellenic College Holy Cross, a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries of London, and the academic coordinator of the Harvard Summer Program in Greece. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Korkandelli.
This was very naughty. Okay, thank you for this very lengthy introduction. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to welcome you this evening. Frigid conditions. Hello, Consul General, and happy Names Day. To this evening's special event, splendidly put together with Chrysoula, Markella, and their team. This event and a suite of others we will be hosting commemorate the centenary of the genocide of Christian populations, especially the Greek populations in the Ottoman Empire, and the expulsion of those who survived, death camps and marches. We are honored to have award-winning poet, writer, journalist, artist, and activist, Thea, an extraordinary woman, the daughter of an extraordinary mother. Thea will discuss her acclaimed book, Not Even My Name, which is a searing account of the destruction of Anatolia's ancient Greek Christian communities between 1913 and 1923. And this is the account through the eyes of her mother, Ευθυμία Sano Halo. Her book has been hailed one of the most important books ever written on the 21st century, first genocide. And as a young girl, Ευθυμία lived and breathed in the perfumed wooded mountains and plateaus of the Pontic Alps, in the small village of Agios Antonios, south of the city of Fatsa, near Trabzon. And just to honor my discipline, like a good archaeologist, just to give you an idea, this is Trabzon, this is Fatsa, and you can see a bit the landscape, the plateau, the mountains, Soumela, and of course the cathedral church of Trepizond. Fatsa, let's not forget, was the Roman and Byzantine city of Polemonium, and at that time, in the early 20th century, a lively trading hub with remains of Genoese commercial activity still visible in its townscape. It had 8 churches that served Greek Orthodox, Greek Evangelical, and Armenian populations. And the daily life, emotions, and conduct of young Ευθυμία and her siblings were anchored on agricultural work, tending to the family garden, taking care of the livestock, and on the unwritten rules and feast days of an ancient society in an ancient landscape where time stood still at the dawn of the 20th century. Now, through her book, I got to know Thea, and I would like to bring here another story. A few miles west, Merzifon was another kind of hub. An elite destination primarily for Greeks and Armenians. The town was home to Anatolia American College, founded by the Boston-based Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions. And that school became home to my grandmother, Evridiki, a young girl from Kayseri, Caesarea, who was orphaned by her mother and promptly shipped to Anatolia College by her wealthy father, who had remarried and was clueless what to do with young Evridiki. So in 1915, in June, while Ευθυμία enjoyed the last years of a carefree, idyllic, and isolated life, 15-year-old Evridiki hastily gathered her belongings at her school. Like all her 10th grade fellow students, she had to cut short her secondary education, as her beloved school was about to close due to the imminent occupation by the Turkish troops. A year earlier, Evridiki experienced firsthand the massacre of her Armenian teachers and Armenian fellow students at the hands of Turks during the first wave of genocide in Mersiphone. A year later, she married a man 20 years her senior, an industrialist from Lesbos with good looks and a very fiery temper. She was barely 16. The destruction of the Christian populations from Anatolia started on April 1915. It started with Armenians. A few months later, over 1 million Armenians vanished. Then it was the turn of the Assyrians. Over 250,000 Assyrians were massacred in southeastern Turkey, and then it was the turn of the Pontic Greeks. The ethnic cleansing of the Pontic Greeks got interrupted thanks to the First World War, but then continued. And by 1919, the devastation, deportations, death marches, labor camps, and murders of Christian communities reached new levels of depravity. Paramilitary and Kurdish groups, and I think one of the Kurdish groups appears in the village of Efthimia, were let loose in villages that had remained relatively unscathed. Agios Antonios became the theater of destruction and the start of a long martyrdom for Efthimia's family along long and dusty roads. Her family and countless other families were part of a terribly systematic effort by the Turkish government to make these people just vanish from the face of the earth. Hundreds of thousands of deportations were conducted, and a report by the American Committee for Armenian and Syrian Relief stated that half of the deportees perished from torture and illness. And then we have Susan Wealthy Orvis, a US missionary who in 1922 witnessed the persecution of Greeks during the genocide and the deportation. I have never, in my whole experience in the Near East, witnessed such human sorrow, distress, death, as caused by this vast flight, which is depopulating one of Turkey's richest provinces. It was like a march of terror. Every face bore death-like pallor. Women carried babies in arms and were stooped from the weight of all their possessions on their backs. Majority were barefooted. All were miserable, but bore themselves with remarkable fortitude. And while young Efthimia was pushed from place to place, en route to the provinces of Sivas and Aleppo, seeing many of her folk dying of starvation and disease, 18-year-old Evridiki was celebrating the baptism of her firstborn child, Persephone, in Samsun, a city that 3 years earlier had experienced the vast deportation and killing, especially of Greek males. The subsequent trajectory of these two young Greeks could not have been different. Given by her mother to an Armenian family in Syria, in an act of unconditional love, Efthimia lived with them, had her Greek name changed, as it was deemed unpronounceable, and was eventually offered as a bride to a certain Abraham, a kind Assyrian man, 3 times her senior or 3 times her senior, who had come from America looking for a wife. Sano, Efthimia, reached America, went on to have 10 children, and became the archetypical American mother, a gentle soul who emanated unconditional love, affection, and support for her children. Her Greek language was lost to her, as she had no one with whom she could talk to. When asked about their identity, her children, including our friend here, ruthless and anxious to fit in, invented new identities. One day, they claimed they were ancient Egyptians. Another day, Turks. People around them, including their patronizing teachers, clueless of what Pontic Greeks and Assyrians are, corrected them with great authority. No, dear, you mean you are Syrian. The Assyrians are ancient people. They do not exist anymore. And thus, Euphemia Sano spoke little, if at all, about her past. It was only in the late 90s when Thea decided to go with her mother on a journey from New York to Ankara, and from there to the southern Black Sea coast, that Sano Euphemia could finally find her voice and tell her story. Her return to the ancient landscapes that had shaped her childhood and character gave her the strength and space to confront, relive, and retell a painful past, her story. What neuroscientists call corrective emotional experience and trauma treatment, Thea did it all for her beloved mother. Meanwhile, my late father, Stavros Georgantelis, a clinical psychologist, whose desire to understand his emotionally absentee mother, Evridiki, was often, this is why he studied, he was often confiding to me his sorrow of not being able to help her. Two girls, two stories, each shaped by the girls' early childhood experiences, their displacement, and their lament for their lost homes and loved ones. I often read stories of the continued drama of displaced, brutalized, and vulnerable people in the 21st century. Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine, and history lessons political leaders have never bothered to learn. I think of young Euphemia when I look at young girls arriving on dinghies on the island of Lesbos, or girls stoned to death or shot for their audacity to ask for basic human rights in Afghanistan and Iran. What drives them to be so brave? What drives them to remain unshakable in the face of evil and adversity? I often think of your book, Dear Thea, and I think of the indomitable spirit of your mother, Euphemia. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you all for coming. It's awfully cold outside. I wasn't sure if anyone would show up. First, I'd like to thank Eurydice. Tell me how you say
It's perfect.
Eurydice. Of course, it reminds me of the wonderful Greek myths. Sorry. And for reaching out for me originally. I think it's better in this. I'll try to remember to speak into it. So I want to thank Eurydice Georgantelis for reaching out to me and asking me to come and present to you, and also to Chrysoula Kurkunti, I hope I'm pronouncing everyone's name right, for helping to bring me here. And of course to Markella and Chrysanthi for their wonderful hospitality. They've taken good care of me since I've been here. And I want to thank, of course, the Maliotis Cultural Center of Hellenic College Holy Cross for hosting me in this event. I've debated whether to simply relay the facts of the genocide or point out some of the so-called historians not only twist the facts, but sometimes actually invent them to suit an agenda. One of my favorite quotes concerning the duplicity of some scholars is by Upton Sinclair, who wrote, "It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his job depends on not understanding it." So I thought I'd offer the following examples to remind you to be alert when reading history, because those with an agenda are sometimes found in surprising places. In my struggle to get recognition for the genocide of the Pontian and other Asia Minor Greeks and Assyrians at the International Association of Genocide Scholars, or IAGS, some scholars who taught the Armenian genocide fought against the passage of the genocide resolution that Professor Adam Jones and I presented for approval. They apparently wanted what I call an exclusivity of suffering for the Armenian genocide. Their arguments to support pulling the resolution before a vote because they knew it would pass were sometimes ludicrous. One claimed that Greece's landing of the troops at Smyrna and Greece's intention of taking back ancient lands, or Greece's Megali idea as it was called, caused the young Turks to resort to genocide, although those scholars didn't call it genocide. This myth tends to shift the blame to Greece. However, Greece landed troops at Smyrna on May 15, 1919, after the Great War, as a provision of the Treaty of Sèvres, which was signed but never ratified. The killing and displacement of Greeks began in eastern Thrace in 1913, 6 years earlier, and continued in Anatolia beginning in 1914 in preparation for the Great War. These attacks on Anatolian Greeks were the precursor to the full-blown genocide of the Christian populations. Robert Melson, who taught the Armenian genocide, was one of the opponents of the resolution. In a book of essays on the Armenian genocide compiled and edited by Dr. Richard Hovhannissian, entitled The Armenian Genocide in Perspective, Melson made this dramatic yet shockingly false assertion. Quote, "Of profound significance for the Armenians was the fact that the loss of the European provinces in effect destroyed the multinational and multi-religious character of the Ottoman Empire. The Greeks and then the Balkan Christians has seceded, leaving the Armenians as the last of the great Christian minorities still under Ottoman rule," end quote. In the conclusion to his paper, as if to make sure he left the reader with the impression that the Armenians were the only victims of the genocide, Melson wrote, quote, "Because the Armenians were the last Christian millets that had not seceded from the Ottoman Empire," end quote. In a few sentences repeated again and again, Melson erased almost 4 million Greek and Assyrians from Asia Minor and their 4 millennia of history as if they never existed. Melson cites no authority for his assertions, which makes them even more ridiculous. But he does cite Marjorie Hovsepian Dobkin's The Smyrna Affair in his biography, as well as Ambassador Morgenthau's story. Had he actually read those books, he would have found Hovsepian's book focuses on the burning of Smyrna. The burning of Smyrna by the Turks in 1922, after their massacre of the Armenians and much of the Greek population. The Smyrna Affair also affirms that, quote, "Turks renewed their death marches in Cilicia, killing thousands upon thousands of Greeks and Armenians who had escaped the massacres and returned to their homes," end quote. In Ambassador Morgenthau's story, we read, quote, "The story which I have told about the Armenians, I could tell with certain modifications about the Greeks and Assyrians." The trend of reporting an exclusive Armenian genocide can also be seen in Samantha Power's A Problems from Hell, America and the Age of Genocide, published as late as 2002. In her book, Power Only, lists the Armenians as victims of the Ottoman genocide. Since Power's footnotes and bibliography indicate that she relied heavily on Ambassador Morgenthau's story as a source for her documentation of the Armenian genocide, one has to wonder if Powers actually read Morgenthau's book, or she was simply given excerpts that failed to mention the Greeks and Assyrians, since reference to Greek or Greeks can be found about 100 times in Morgenthau's text. Assyrians or Syrians are also mentioned numerous times. Some scholars claim that the Anatolian Greeks were protected by Greece. However, there is strong evidence that Greece's King Constantine I, married to the sister of the German Kaiser, who was an ally of Turkey, was not interested in protecting the Anatolian Greeks. In fact, there is strong evidence that Constantine was a secret ally of Turkey and Germany. One of these so-called scholars at the IAGS actually claimed that the Greeks were just sent out of Turkey for their own protection. In Bruce Clark's Twice a Stranger, Clark writes, quote, 800,000 Armenians, 300,000 Greeks, and 2.5 million Turks were killed in mutual slaughter. That absurd claim should cause the reader to wonder if Clark was not paid by the Turkish government to write his book. Not only does Clark cite a very low number for Greeks killed, Clark's number for Turks killed suggests that the Greeks and Armenians of Anatolia committed genocide against the Turkish population. Even the Turkish government, then and now, has never made such an absurd claim or cited such numbers. Political scientist Rudolf Rummel writes that had Armenians and/or Greeks caused such extraordinary numbers of Muslim deaths, it would have garnered loud protests. Perhaps more important, Jamal Pasha, the military governor of Constantinople beginning in 1913, and one of the three main leaders of the Young Turks, wrote in his memoir that Turkey had lost Sorry about that. That Turkey had sacrificed over 3 million men in the course of the World War. What Jamal Pasha does not allege is that Armenians and Greeks killed them in mutual slaughter. Bruce Clark surely had access to Jamal Pasha's book. But Clark doesn't stop there. In his book, Clark first praises my mother's narrative in Not Even My Name, then warns the reader against believing the historical section of my book by inventing a quote that he attributes to me. He gives no page number for reference because the invented quote does not exist in my book. When I challenged him by email, he first tried to claim that a single, or what he called a broken quote, wasn't really a quote. When pressed, he then admitted it can be taken as one. He then promised to delete it. In another example, Clark writes, quote, in the euphemistic words of a leading Greek historian of Crete, etc. Clark then makes another absurd claim, but fails to tell us who this mysterious leading Greek historian might be, or where we can find his euphemistic words, other than Clark's representation of them that Clark seems to have pulled out of his hat. Now there is a new book that praises the Ottoman Empire in glorious detail, at least those details that steer clear of both the genocides and the treatment of Christians throughout the Ottoman long rule. In Diane Dark's book, The Ottomans, A Cultural Legacy, Sultan Abdulhamid, who was responsible for the slaughter of almost 253,000 Christians during his bloody 33-year rule, is not mentioned. It's not listed in the index. Tamerlane is depicted as a lover of art, which seems to excuse his abduction of craftsmen of talent to work for their new rulers. Tamerlane's alleged slaughter of 17 million people on his rampage from Asia through the Middle East is not mentioned. As if a notice was sent out, the author uses the term recruited for the forcible taking of the best and brightest 8 to 15-year-old Christian children from their families to be brainwashed, circumcised, converted to Islam, and trained as janissaries. The children in the beginning, mainly Greek boys, were too young to make their own decisions, and therefore they could not have been recruited, which accounts for Dark's rather dismissive account of, quote, desperate mothers trailing after the Ottoman soldiers lamenting the loss of their sons, end quote. The enrollment, as she calls it, was true only many years later when Muslims were finally allowed to serve in the Janissary Corps. As to the genocides, Dark claims that although there was brutality at times, Christian victims were singled out not because they were Christians, but because of disloyalty. In other words, Dark suggests that the genocide of the Christian populations was the fault of the Christians, although Dark doesn't call it genocide. Although this was a genocide of the Christians of Anatolian Greeks, Assyrians, and Armenians by a predominantly Muslim nation, religion per se had relatively little to do with the decision for genocide. Germany, after all, was and is predominantly a Christian nation, and it was very much involved. As with almost all genocides, commerce, territory, resources, and power are the true motivators. As some of the only educated people in the empire at that time, Christians and Jews were often the main tradesmen. Getting rid of the Christians would allow the Turks to take their place in commerce. In his official report, U.S. Consul General George Horton wrote, "I have heard Turkish politicians make speeches at Salonika in which they affirm that if the Christians were exterminated and driven out, the Turks would of sheer necessity progress and develop schools, commerce, and industry." Then followed the great massacres. A desire for commerce with Turkey, and even the motivation for the U.S. and other allies to turn was a motivation for the U.S. and other allies to turn a blind eye during the massacres and death marches. Instigating the Turkish public to take part using religion and or race, a term widely used at the time to describe the various ethnic peoples, were simply useful tools of the governing elite. George Horton reported in the spring of 1914, before the commencement of the Great War, that the Aegean coast Greeks of Anatolia were being demonized to induce the Turkish population to destroy them. I quote, "Violent and inflammatory articles in the Turkish newspapers appeared unexpectedly and without any cause, so evidently inspired by the authorities. Cheap lithographs, executed in the clumsiest and most primitive manner, represented Greeks cutting up Turkish babies or ripping open pregnant Muslim women, and various purely imaginary scenes founded on no actual events or even accusations elsewhere made. These were hung in the mosques and schools to set the Turks to killing," end quote. Of course, such lies could easily incite a population to attack those they are told were destroying their women and children. Without such campaigns to demonize Greeks and other Christians, Turks often lived side by side with their Christian neighbors without incident. My mother attested to that. Between 600,000 and 800,000 Armenians were slaughtered by the Young Turks and Kemalist regime beginning in 1915. although some historians put the number at 1.5 million. At least 275,000 Assyrians were also killed, beginning in 1914. Some put the number of Greeks killed during the period between 1913, beginning in 1913, at 600,000. I believe it was more like 1.2 million, however, since according to Greece's census of 1928, little more than 1.2 million refugees arrived in Greece. Among them were 100,000 Armenians, 1,000 Assyrians, and 9,000 Circassians. Therefore, of the estimated 2.5 to 3 million Ottoman Greeks of Anatolia, little more than 1.1 million Greeks arrived in Greece by 1928. This figure also still allows for some Greeks who lived along the Black Sea coast who fled to Russia, and some who survived the death marches to Syria. When my book was first published in 2000, and I gave readings at Greek events, I was told by some audience members that they never believed their family stories because they were too horrible to be true. That is, they never believed the family members until they read not even my name and realized that their family stories were so similar to my mother's stories. Perhaps that's why eyewitness accounts by those who lived through these tragedies, such as my mother, are so important. Although my mother also describes life in her village in happier times, I'd like to read from chapter 19 about the long death march. It's called Babies and Buzzards. They traveled from there, my mother's, all the way down. The march was a nightmare I have partially wiped from my eyes so I could survive. The day-by-day events have disappeared, blended together much the way the days blend one into the other in the land of the midnight sun in summer. Our nights seem no more than a cloud passing across the dazzling blue of the sky when we could close our eyes before the sun would begin to shine again, as if time were a continuum, stream not divided into zones. Each sweltering day ended not by night and calm, or an evening meal with family gathered around the fire, but by another death, another corpse, another wail of grief, tearing a gaping hole in my heart. Only certain memories come back, but those memories come with a reality that's frightening. I find myself standing before the scene again with glazed eyes. The years are wiped away, and I am 10 years old again, seeing and smelling and hearing everything as if it were before me now. Even with my eyes wide open, all of my present surroundings disappear, and I am back again on that scabby road to hell. Corpses are lying on stone walls or on the road lined up like targets at a shooting gallery, while the buzzards that followed us wherever we go hung like grotesque prizes pinned to the sky. By the time we reached central Turkey, the weather was so hot, even moving was a chore. Water was scarce, and the sun beat down and sucked the moisture from our lips, splitting them open to bleed against our swollen tongues. Sometimes in the distance, great clear ponds, pools of water lay in our path. They would draw our shriveled bodies on, our minds filled with the vision of falling headlong into a cool oasis to replenish our bodies' lost sea of sweat and tears. Those who still could quickened their steps with arms outstretched, grasping toward the moist, wavy air rising from the pool, their bodies falling forward with each step. But time and time again, as we drew near, as if by some devil's dirty deed, the pool would grow smaller and smaller, and we'd arrive in time to watch the last dregs suck together and disappear, only to appear further down the road. Each day, my Thea was heavier on my back, and my clammy, long-sleeve dress, thick with dust and perspiration, stuck to me like wet glue. With each passing day, Mother seemed more debilitated, perhaps from the strain of nursing the twins without proper food or water. At the edge of a small town, there was a water fountain, with water flowing continuously, spilling its cool treasure into a stone bowl, then overflowing onto the ground, turning the stones around it black. I had never seen Mother so in need before. She had always been the graceful, patient jewel the Turks rightly called gazelle. But Mother left the file to stumble to the fountain. The exiles stopped and watched expectantly, ready to race to the fountain also if she succeeded in her quest. But just before she reached it, a Turkish soldier trotted up on his horse, spitting out commands. He raised his whip and gave her a lash like one would an ox or a donkey. She fell to her knees as my feet rooted to the earth and my heart split open. Father threw down his bundles and ran to her. "Water, please," Mother said to the soldier. Father tried to raise Mother to her feet. "Please." The soldier raised his whip again, spitting out more abuse. He would have hit her again, but Father threw his arms around her shoulders and pulled her away. The disappointment on the marchers' dirt-streaked faces was barely noticeable. It was more like numbness that showed in their eyes, the numbness that comes from deprivation and prolonged defeat. Mother stumbled back to her place as the others turned like robots to continue their march. Was it on that day that little Maria died? I don't remember. I only remember her little body tied to Christodula's back like a papoose, her little head bobbing back and forth, and the realization that something was wrong crept up my hot body with a cold, clammy panic. "Mama," I said, as calmly as I could, hoping my calmness would make everything all right. "Maria looks funny." Mother looked up and burst into tears. Maria's face had turned ashen. Her eyes stared out at nothing like little doll eyes that were broken in the open position. And her head rolled back and forth with each step. "What's wrong?" Christodula demanded in a panic. "What is it?" We stopped in the road like a pile of stones in a river. The weary exiles ruptured out around us and continued their march. Mother took Maria from Christodula's back and cradled her in her arms as her tears washed Maria's lifeless face. "Move," a soldier shouted as he trotted up to where we stood. "My baby," Mother said. She held out Maria for the soldier to see, as if her shock and grief could also be his. "My baby." "Throw it away if it's dead," he shouted. "Move." "Let me bury her," Mother pleaded, sobbing. "Throw it away," he shouted again, raising his whip. "Throw it away." Mother clutched Maria's body to her breast as we stood staring up at him. Her face was gripped with a torment I had never seen before. Father reached for Maria, to put her down, I suppose, but Mother clutched her even more tightly. Then she walked over to the high stone wall that separated the road from the town and lifted Maria up to lay her on the wall's top, as if on an altar before the Almighty. That night, Mother cried herself to sleep, and each time I closed my own eyes, I saw her holding Maria up to the heavens like an offering. The image of her lifeless body lying on the wall like some gift in a pagan ritual followed me even into my dreams and all through the next days. Each time I thought of my little sister left lying there alone in the burning sun with the buzzards flying about waiting for us to pass, the tears would come without my ability to control them. They walked for a long time, and as some of you know who read my book, they finally one night escaped from the soldiers and ran away in the middle of the night. And my mother would go out to, my grandmother would go out to search in the fields to see if she can find something for the family to eat. And she always brought my mother with her because my mother never wanted to leave her side. And one day they went to a little hamlet, and when they knocked on the door, the woman said, "Oh, what a beautiful girl, why don't you leave this one with me, and I'll take good care of her." And at first my grandmother said no because she couldn't bear to give her up. But then she realized that they would all starve. And so she went back, she gave my mother to this woman and made her promise to take care of her. And of course, the woman treated my mother as a slave and eventually changed her name to Sano because she claimed she couldn't pronounce her Greek name. And that's, of course, where the name of the book comes from. After my mother stayed with this woman for a few years, I believe she finally ran away and went to Diyarbakir. And this family, this Armenian family, took her in. That's my mother on the left, and Zora is the woman next to her, and Grandma, and Hagop, and then the two little children that my mother helped take care of, Sonia and Araxin. This is my mother getting the Award of Excellence for Women's History Month with the Governor of New York, George Pataki. She was so proud of this. And this is with the Consul General in New York, Agi Balta. My mother is being sworn in to become a Greek citizen. And we're all laughing because Agi said, "Okay, now say I do." And she said, "I do." And so we all burst out laughing. My mother said she was so happy to have Greek citizenship because her passport says her origin is Turkey. And so she said, now everyone will know that I'm not a Turk, that I'm a Greek. This is the resolution that Adam and I drew up at the International Association of Genocide Scholars, and it passed with overwhelming support after we they finally allowed a vote, and they only allowed a vote because the then president, Israel Charney of the IAGS, he demanded they put this to the hindrance. And when the vote was allowed, it passed overwhelmingly. Thank you all. Oh, okay. Shall I just take this?
So, an extraordinary account, an extraordinary woman. I am speechless, and this doesn't happen often. So, I would like to start this section of our evening by trying to understand this is a genocide. This is a very dark chapter in early modern history. And yet, there is the complicity of silence. You mentioned Bruce Clark. And then there is also the way the Greeks of mainland Greece welcome these displaced and brutalized people. I come from Thessaloniki, from refugees' families, and we know that the refugee families made modern Greece. So they encountered resentment, negativity, and even in your quest, very often they ask you, why are you some kind of masochist, stirring up the past? So, what's going on? Why also this exclusivity of suffering? You are a trailblazer and an activist who fought really hard to pass this resolution. And yet in our own communities, Greek American communities, we never, or very often we don't make the effort to explain this part of our past. And I think this is terrible. You know, we have great communities out there, the Armenians and the Jewish communities who are great advocates, and yet us, we are silent. So would you like to, do you have some kind of answers? Because I am always furious at people who don't remember. Remembrance is not only a duty, it's the only thing that separates us from total ignorance and repeating mistakes. So what's going on there?
You know, I unfortunately can't speak for the Greek community because I don't know the Greek community well enough to speak for them. And of course, there are many different viewpoints. It's not a single viewpoint. My mother always said, if I could only write, I would tell the world what happened. And of course, I was so happy to be able to tell the world for her. And I think that this is so important for people to remember their history, to know who they are, to know where they come from, to know what they've accomplished, what they've suffered, and embrace that and pass that on to future generations. I'm not sure why the Greeks really don't stand by, and really support each other as much as the Jewish and Armenian communities. They give, the Armenians give millions of dollars and purchase chairs at universities and give these historians like the one that made up these lies in a book, they get rewarded with chairs at universities. There are not so many chairs, I don't believe, of Greek chairs at universities. I wrote a screenplay for my book, which I would love to have made. I think this would put this on the map, this whole issue, and we have to maybe raise money. We have to, so that producers and directors will want to jump on board once they know that there's funds available.
That's a great call, actually. Yes.
It would be a great asset, actually.
Of course, and we are really commemorating a centenary. How much longer this silence? So I had my first question. Who is going to be the brave one and continue? Does any of you have roots in Anatolia and the Pontos?
Oh.
So I'm sure you have burning questions, but also observations. Thea mentioned that when she was, in her book, that when she was growing up, people didn't understand what is a Pontic Greek. And when I mentioned that I come from Kayseri and my great-grandparents were working in the silver mines, etc., they think I talk about the biblical times. Yeah? And then so in your own community, when you were growing up, or even now as adults, what is your reaction to this past? And has this book made any difference? Because for me it made huge. Yes.
My question is, I'm not Greek at all. I'm just married to a wonderful Greek. But can you guys hear me now? All right. So my question is, why do the mainland Greeks, do you have a hypothesis as to why the mainland Greeks don't support the refugees? Or I guess you were saying, like, why is there a lack of a movement within the Greek community to, say, purchase those chairs, to make this more public? Or is there, am I just totally unaware of it? Do you have any hypothesis to that, or?
I know only that, thank you. I mean, in 1923 when they, no? Like this? Okay. In 1922-23 when they arrived, the welcome was horrible. They let people dying in the outskirts of Thessaloniki. It's a martyrdom place. In the outskirts of Athens, they didn't make them feel welcome. The complete opposite. Now, 100 years later, I don't know. I think in Greece we are very good at arguing, but we are not very good in studying carefully and thoroughly our history. And unless we get our facts right, I don't think we feel comfortable arguing our case. So there is a complicity starting from ignorance and from laziness. which I don't support because I give very bad grades to students who are lazy. So, so about the international community, you can see that there are all sorts of considerations related also to budgetary reasons. You know, we are the only people who suffered, and therefore we can get support, etc. As for the Greeks, for goodness sake, you know, who are these people and how many of them died? So, but for Greeks, I think we have a lack of historical perspective very often. We consume ourselves with the present, but we don't take enough attention regarding the past.
You know, I would like to add something to this, actually, which I remember. You know, Greeks, everyone wants to be king. No one wants to be, you know, working for the king. So when these issues come up, you know, everyone wants, there's a kind of almost even a jealousy, you know, involved, that everyone wants to be the leader. And everyone can't be the leader. Some have to be the leader and some have to be the followers and to help the leader achieve their goals. And this is sometimes lacking, I find, in the Greek community. You know, when my book was first published, I had an idea to make what I called a living Pontian museum in Greece. And I thought I'd do it up north where, in a village where the people said that they come from my mother's village, that they were just, you know, descendants from her village. And the mayor was going to give me land, everyone was excited, but a woman in the next village got jealous, and she had more control. She had, you know, knew a lot of very wealthy people, and so the mayor backed down. Then she decided, okay, a friend went and spoke to her, okay, if you do it here in my village, then we can do it. So we met with her, with the mayor, the lawyers. It was all arranged. We chose a spot. She approved it. And before the week was up, someone told me, oh, no, she's not going to do that. She's not going to do that. So, you know, it's very difficult because everyone wants to be the king and no one wants to, you know, help just make the whole projects work, I find.
Thank you.
You know, I think, you know, can't we sit closer and we can just share them? That makes more sense. That makes more sense, and then we don't have to worry about that.
Mrs. Halo, welcome to Hellenic College. I'm Timothy Petitsis, the Dean at Hellenic College right now. Can you tell us about, have you done a lot of travels in Turkey yourself or in Syria or traced some of the places? You know, can you tell us about your experience of going back?
I haven't been to Syria. The only time I've been to Turkey was with my mother. And we went, we flew to Ankara. And then, you know, sometimes I also want to say this because sometimes I think that there's such a thing as fate. You know, the things are meant to be. Because I went to the bus station. We flew to Ankara, went to the bus station to see if we can take a bus to Fatsa. And we still didn't know where this village was. We still couldn't find it on a map because she only knew it by the name Ayondon, which is the common way of saying it, not Ayas Antonios. And when I asked the ticket man how long it takes to get to Fatsa, he said, I think 12 hours. And I said, oh, that's so long for my mother. And a Turk behind me poked me and said, why not stop at Amasya? It's halfway in between. And so we did stop at Amasya. And a man on the bus, I call him the man with the map, Harry Sace. He had a map, and he knew, and he was Greek, and he spoke Greek. He's American, Greek-American, but he spoke the language. He had the map. And we both stayed in the same hotel. We went out, and these two young Turkish boys started talking to us. And they said, why don't you stay in that pension? It used to be an old Armenian mansion. And so we said, all right, he brought us there. And Harry by himself also went there. And we were sitting there, and he sat with my mother in the courtyard, and I went to ask the Turkish owner of the pension if he knew where our village was. And he said he didn't know, but he knows there's lots of Greek villages. And when we went back, Harry pulled out a map, and he says, your story is my story. And he said, Ayas Antonios, that's the real name, and he showed us on the map. And the Turkish, he was an architect, the owner of the pension. He was so excited. He said, if you wait one day, he said, I'll take you to find it because I want to see your face when you see your home. You know, I have to say, we were met with only kindness in Turkey by the Turks. I mean, they were exceptionally kind, you know. And when we actually went up the mountain, you know, the Turk, he arranged for Dolmuş to take us up, and they gave us a price. And after they brought us up there and back, and we were getting on a bus to go to Fatsa, I was going to pay the Dolmuş driver his price, and Ali says he wants to lower his price. And I said, he said he knows he doesn't have to, but he wants to. So, you know, it was a wonderful trip. And then the extraordinary thing was, when we went to Fatsa and stayed at the hotel, they must have told our Dolmuş driver that brought us to Fatsa who we were. And my mother and I stayed there for, I think, 2 days. And then we took a bus to, because we wanted to see Sumala. And when we went to pay for the hotel, they said, no charge. And we never knew why, but we think that they told the Dolmuş driver, and they told the owner of the pension. And then we got on the bus, and he said, no charge. He charged Harry, but he didn't charge my mother and me.
Can I have a follow-up question as well? Unless there's someone else, though, please, if you keep your eye on who's next. What would you like to see next for genocide studies? What's the next step that you'd like to see that field take to prevent this sort of thing, or is there anything sort of on your heart in that direction?
Well, of course, I've written a manuscript. I've written a history of this whole period that I'd like to get published. But what I really would like is to have my film made, because I think film, of course, speaks to multiple generations and across a wide spectrum of people. And I think that's one of the best ways of getting the message across about what happened. And also, you know, when these genocides are ignored, it just encourages more genocides, because people see that it's easy to get away with it. You know, commerce, as I said, gets in the way. Even the Americans were more interested in the end in commerce with Turkey than they were in protecting and saving the Christians that were being sent on these death marches. So I think that's a very important thing, is to get the message out in the best ways that reach the most people.
I'll see what I can do.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for coming and talking to us. I actually have seen you several years ago at a ponding convention, I think in Connecticut. So regarding your film, maybe we can talk afterwards, but I'm not sure if you're aware of this beautiful movie that recently was released in Greece called Smyrna, My Love.
Yes,
and it was by Mimi Denisi. And I think it's completely...
Someone just sent it to me. Someone sent me the link to it recently, right?
I know she has a sequel to that, but I'm sure that maybe you could be in touch with her, and we could do that. So that might be an option. I had a couple of questions for you. One of them is sad, and would you mind expanding a little more on the role of Germany? Because I have read somewhere that essentially they had perfected the art of the genocide working with the Turks before they applied it to the Jews. But I don't know enough about that.
Well, for one thing, again, it goes back to commerce. In fact, at one point, when the Turks sent this whole Greek community from the northeast, on out, the Germans demanded they put them back because they needed the olive oil that the Greeks were producing at the time. The Germans were very much involved in the genocide, in instigating it in some points, because they wanted, railroads there, they wanted commerce, they wanted so many things. And of course, as I said, because the Christians and the Jews were the most educated. You spoke about the education. Well, my mother speaks about even girl children. Greek girls got educated. That was very unusual. And at the time, the Turks were not educating the public, and most of the Turkish public were completely illiterate. So of course they depended on, that's why they wanted to get rid of the Christians so they can bring up, in fact, George Horton at one point said if we get rid of the Christians, Turkish schools will automatically pop up, and we can educate the Turkish public also and then take over the trade, etc. Germany also instigated it from Germany. There were some things in newspapers and things that they were saying, get rid of the Armenians and the Greeks, and then, give it to, sometimes give it to Jews and Donmei because they were smarter, they can do this better, I spell all of this out in my manuscript because it's a little bit too complicated for here, but they were in it from the beginning. And of course they needed Turkey for the war, the World War I. They were very important to make sure that they joined in the war.
So huge investment in the Balkans and then in Anatolia. Every railway built, you can see a German officer, and then the same German officer training Ottoman soldiers. Railways and commerce in Anatolia was an untapped territory of great riches, so why share it with someone else? And of course, they were great allies during the First World War, so the other was the evil. And indeed, they perfected the act of genocide on these populations before continuing in the late 30s.
There's also in the Pontic region, one of the workers, relief workers, said that they sent 250,000. I mean, he might have exaggerated the numbers, I don't know, but he said 250,000. They put them through Turkish baths and then sent them out into the Anatolian winter. That was one of the ways of killing them. And I thought, isn't it interesting that both Germany and the Turks used this idea of cleanliness, this symbol of cleanliness, to commit mass murder. And then, of course, we know the Germans had these also what they pretended to be showers, So I think that they did definitely learn. And there was also Boy Scouts. Somehow Boy Scouts, they sounded too much like, the German youth later in Germany. So I think they learned a lot of things from the Turks.
And the problem is that if you try to create one identity, and at the moment there is such great effort, right, by our neighbors to have one identity, those trapped populations, because we know also of people who never left, because they were either, they had converted to Islam, or they were hidden, or they married, or they were forced to marry, raped, the lot. So the Black Sea continues to be a hotbed, not only of controversy, but violent acts. Because if you deprive people from their voice, what are they going to do? Who am I? Am I a Greek? Am I a Christian? Am I Armenian? Or am I a Turk? So most of the assassinations and abductions, even now, of foreigners, happen along the Black Sea coast by these trapped communities and individuals. So Samsun, Trabzon, these are the places where these acts very often take place. Any other question? Thank you so much. Yes? You have one.
I wanted to first say thank you so much for being here. I'm a Pontic and Cappadocian Greek, and I hope to study Asian Minor linguistics and hope to preserve that. But one of the first memories I have of learning my identity and where like my family's from was actually reading your book, because it was the first time I saw my village, Bafra, mentioned. And of course, it's not a great mention, but it helped to shape me to who I am. So I do say thank you for that. My question is, I've seen a lot of discourse recently over the name, like what to call the genocide, because a lot of people will refer to it as the Pontian genocide, which then leaves out Cappadocia and Eastern Thrace. So, and like in Greece, there's 3 separate recognition days. And I've seen a lot of calls for, I guess, unification of it. And I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Well, I made sure in this resolution that everyone was included. And I hate to say this, but there is a contingency of the Pontians that want an exclusivity of suffering. They want it to only be Pontian. And of course, this is ridiculous. They all suffered. And they started out not with the Pontians, but with the Thracian Greeks in 1913. And in fact, the Greeks were the first. The Assyrians were the second to be attacked, and then the Armenians were attacked after that. So yes, it's very important to include everybody in this and make sure that everyone knows that everyone suffered equally.
And it's not only between the different kind of groups, but it's also between different Pontic groups, right? They have different celebrations, they have different sumela. It's ridiculous. We are united, not only in our grief, but also in our obligation to remember and act upon.
I think, and I'm not sure of this, but I think that the reason why there were separate Pontian and then Asia Minor Greek in Greece memorials is because the Pontic Greeks were very active in the beginning, and I think they really pushed for this. And then maybe after that, when that happened, then the other Asia Minor Greeks then also became more active. So maybe that's why there's 2 different dates.
It's me again. I wanted to ask, you mentioned hiding, and the thing that comes to my mind right away is Anne Frank. Is there any similar story of whether it's Pontian, Cappadocian, or Thracian Greeks where they have a story similar to that of how they hid, where they hid, of something in that kind of detail that would be like a compelling movie story, that may grip the public?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't really know of any story like that. There may be, but I just don't know of any. Okay. That's like Anne Frank. But somebody once, by the way, said that my mother is the Anne Frank of the Pontic Greeks.
Hi, thank you both for being here. I think in our conversation we a little bit answered the mystery of why we're not united, right? When you have 3 commemorations of it and whatnot. I've grown up here. The American Revolution has been drilled into us ridiculously. What is the education system in Greece, and what are and I know that you can't answer that, but maybe, what do they teach in the school systems in Greece in terms of history, and this particular history, that helps unite the fight?
I can see my honorable friend Simeon here nodding. It's not good, because history books, I don't know, sometimes I feel that they conclude their storyline with Athens in the 5th century. And then the 20th century, not to mention Byzantium, and we can talk perhaps why these populations are so silent in the story of Greece. Is it because it's the Ottoman Empire, it's the Byzantine Greeks, and not classical Greece? But even with the catastrophe of Smyrna, there were such awful accounts that you have thought that the author, sponsored sometimes by the Greek Hellenic Ministry of Education, was an agent of Turkey. So I'm not going to, we are in the presence of a diplomat. Let's be diplomatic, but also let's slam this continuous effort, not to downplay, but not to mention these horrible things that happen.
Please mention the education minister in Greece.
Okay, he's a past one. So, so in 2015, Mr. Philis, the then Minister of Education, had a whole tirade about this fixation. And Thea responded in the most robust way, saying that you are someone who is really, it's like treason, right? Because either you are an agent of Turkey, this is a terrible insult for the memory of all those people who were tortured and perished, and something is really wrong, because you are the representative of Greece. So we have gone through different waves of small recognition, medium recognition, no recognition, and as for the history books, these are not okay. But these are not also okay regarding the period after classical Greece. And I have an issue with this. So all these people, you know, they kept their names, they kept their religion for how many hundreds of years? Because they were Christians. Is this mentioned? Why my grandmother gives the name Persephone? Come on. Ulysses. Or I don't know what. Everyone had an ancient Greek name. This is resistance and resilience. But we choose, as Greece, to make them feel silent, as if they never existed.
You know, by the way, one of the reasons why we decided that we were Egyptians when we were young, because my mother never knew this word Pontic Greek. She never heard that. She said they called us Rum. Well, of course, an American, we didn't know what the heck was Rum. Was that Romanian? Was that, were they gypsies? We didn't know what they were. And so that's why we invented a heritage, so we can have a heritage. My mother later, when I wrote the book, she said she had never heard the word Pontic Greek. She didn't know that word. So, of course, this also created a lot of confusion for the earlier, generations. And in school, by the way, as Eurydice said, if I said I was Assyrian, they said, no, you're mistaken. They aren't. There's no such thing as Assyrians anymore. They're all dead, and you're probably Syrian.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, Father Vasilie.
Accepting this resolution, just out of curiosity? Are there any Turks here in America or in Turkey accepting, taking responsibility for the genocide?
Well, there are certainly Turkish scholars, that of course were against the resolution because they worked for the Armenians. But then, of course, I seriously believe, and I may be absolutely wrong on this, but I seriously believe that they knew that I would out them. And so now they've all joined forces and they write now about the Greek genocide. Because, so some of the ones that we're talking about not having the resolution passed now write about the Greek genocide. I was going to say, I would love to close, are we finished? I would love to close with a poem I wrote, if you're interested. It was inspired. It was inspired by William Butler Yeats' sailing to Byzantium. And I wrote it in memory of the Christian genocide. I call mine Dredging Byzantium. From the noisy gutter of my heart I dredged Byzantium, cleansed of her ancients and their heirs. Her temples turned to domes, her domes to spires, the slouching beasts living in the promised land. Who chants your glory now, Byzantium? Sumala, a broken nest of hollow eyes left on mountain cliffs for nebulous gazers. Who heard Anatolia wail her grief, or came to cart her exiles banished from their ancient shores, their own ships dry-docked for 3,000 years? And when they moored to foreign shores, who came to welcome those hapless mariners from burning Smyrna, from battered Troy, Penelope no longer at her loom, or heard Ponto screaming from the flames, 20 times 20 times 20 miles of bloody dragging feet, babies and buzzards strewn along the road. the stench of death imbued every rock and stream. No, that is no country for old men, for who can blind them as they blind their young these many ignoble years? Now like sirens gathered on this other shore, Thea song, upon our lips we sing your snuffed out lore. For 3 million Christian souls in uneasy sleep, beneath your mountain ridges, banks and shores, we sing of what is past and passing and what's to come. Thank you.
So we would like to invite you, thank you so much, all of you, to the reception also. I'm going to have my book signed, so get yours ready. Thank you so much.